The MMORPG is quite unique in the sense of how many things that there are to do. You have questing, dungeons, raiding, PvP, gathering, crafting, collecting achievements. But for some, the real draw is building, claiming land, raising walls, furnishing rooms, and creating sanctuaries that reflect their adventures. This is player housing, a cornerstone of immersion that turns a video game into a second home. Its origins can be traced all the way back to Ultima Online in 1997, and it still seems to captivate the MMORPG community nearly 3 decades later. So, build an oak chair, grab a cold one from your newly made keg, and relax by the fire as today we explore the history, appeal, and the enduring magic of player housing in the MMORPG. Before we get into the why, I think we should get into the what. If you ask 2 people what player housing is, you'll probably get 2 entirely different answers, as they're handled very differently depending on the actual MMO. For some, it's a purely aesthetic feature that's meant to serve as more of a distraction than its own content, and for others, it's the entire reason to play, or the game's other features are closely intertwined with it, so much so that they can't even imagine playing without it. Some have been done amazingly well, some have been done quite poorly, and others didn't even exist at all. So let's explore the world of player housing in the MMORPG. But before that, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this video, AG1. AG1 is a very simple, drinkable multivitamin. We all know how much MMO fans love their daily quests. Except with this, instead of getting depression, you get a nutritional daily supplement that supports your gut health. Aside from complaining about retail World of Warcraft, it's the only daily quest that I do. It's quite a simple routine. You just mix it and drink it. I do it first thing in the morning, and I've been using it for quite a while now, and I'm on a multi-month long streak, and I know it doesn't sound like it with my voice because, monotone, but I do feel like I have more energy, and it now also comes in 3 additional flavors of citrus, berry, or tropical, my personal favorite being tropical. They're currently running their best offer ever. If you head to drinkag1.com/madseason, or by scanning the QR code that you see on screen, you'll get the welcome kit, this morning person hat, a bottle of vitamin D3 and K2, a flavor sampler, and you'll also get to try their new sleep supplement AGZ, which has been a game changer for my nightly routine. And all of that's $126 in free gifts for new subscribers. So usually the first hurdle with housing that every developer wrestles with is real estate. That is the land that you put the house on, or in a lot of cases, the lack thereof. And anyone familiar with World of Warcraft will know what I'm talking about here. If you want a housing system that exists in the natural playable world, the geography has to be built with housing in mind. For the first half of this video, I want to use World of Warcraft as an example for this because most people are probably familiar with it. And it also really encapsulates the struggles with housing quite perfectly. So this might seem like a World of Warcraft video for a bit, but it will become more broad later on. As big as Azeroth is, pretty much every single corner of the world has some sort of function. This part is a town hub. Alright, but what about outside the town hub? Oh, that's where the mobs spawn for quests that were given in the town hub. What about this? That's where the dungeon is. How about this? This looks pretty clear. That's where a Peace Bloom spawns. This is where an NPC patrols to. This is where a world boss spawns. This is meant to farm a rare item drop, and you get the picture. And while this ended up being a very attractive feature of the game, as it didn't have these very open, sort of dead and bland areas that was quite common with the genre at that point, a downside was that there was no space for housing. And you combine this with the fact that each server holds thousands of people per layer, the problem becomes quite clear. The world simply wasn't designed for player housing. That's not to say that the developers didn't try. There actually existed commands in the alpha version of the game to spawn houses, but this rather iconic screenshot highlights the problem perfectly, as the first thing that someone did with this great power was to block off the starting area for the Night Elves where players are meant to be learning about the game. There were also areas and maps set aside for houses, but obviously the idea was scrapped, which left only one option: instance housing. Instead of putting down a house in the jungles of Stranglethorn Vale or a dark corner of Duskwood, it would instead be in this separated, instanced grounds designed specifically for player housing. This for some is less immersive, unless every time you walk into your home you get a loading screen. There is a group of purists out there who prefer that the houses be in the actual world, because it makes it feel more like, well, an actual world. Someone could be exploring or farming or questing, and to come across someone's home and see how they decorated it is an interesting distraction that feels immersive and natural, as opposed to having to specifically and quite rigidly go to the designated housing area to visit other people's homes. So it's certainly not as much freedom as some players would like, but it is something. And back to World of Warcraft, this too we found had been considered as early as the alpha version of the game. There's this portal found in the human city Stormwind that was blocked off by this gate, and funny enough, this would remain the case all the way until the Cataclysm expansion, where the city itself and all of Azeroth was remade, leaving players just mystified of its purpose. But at some point, it would have been the housing district in Stormwind, it was called, where it would be this entire new wing of the city that would allow players to enter some good old lifelong debt in exchange for a virtual roof over their virtual heads. But this too would not come to pass. As for why, no one really knows. Maybe they simply hadn't found a way to aggressively monetize it yet, but it didn't stop players from aggressively requesting it. It was by far the most common feature request in pretty much every stage of the game, and Blizzard would commonly cite concerns with taking players out of the world and also requiring so much work that they would have to sacrifice an entire rating tier. But persistence did pay off, and as it would turn out, players did eventually get a form of it in the Warlords of Draenor expansion, and this is where we reach our first example of a system that unfortunately ended up being poorly implemented. The year is 2014, and players revisit the Orc homeworld of Draenor in an alternate reality where, at the critical moment where Garrosh drank the Mountain Dew, corrupting his clan into over-caffeinated, balding gamers, he was stopped by his son Garrosh, who at the time was widely panned as being a poorly written character, until Shadowlands came out and Blizzard said, "Alright, you little ungrateful shits. You want to see actual bad writing?" But it was up to the player, or as the game patronizingly put it, the commander, to lead an offensive throughout Chris Metzen's wet dream by way of the garrison system, the blockbuster feature of the expansion. Players would amass followers and build a custom private garrison to serve as their base of operations in their war against the Iron Horde. So it wasn't entirely the conventional idea of what housing is in an MMO, where you choose from different styles or locales, or you have the ability to fine-tune furniture placement and decorate to your heart's desire, but largely because it had been such an intensely requested feature for so long, a lot of the players were like, alright, close enough. And this is where the problems began. It ended up being too powerful, as the garrison system, of course, wasn't just aesthetic in nature. It was much like me, highly functional and pivotal to nearly every activity of the expansion. It had gathering nodes, crafting buildings, you could get an auction house, it was a travel hub, a mission table to get gold, resources, and even raiding gear. And between all of its buildings and perks and bonuses, there's very little you couldn't do inside of the garrison. For every person queuing for LFR or PvP within the confines of their garrison was a missing player that wasn't loitering around in a public space like a major city. And for every person farming in their personal mines or herb garden, that was another person who wasn't out in the world gathering it. And combined with the expansion as a whole kind of being a dud, Blizzard's fear of taking people out of the world became realized, and the actual world of Draenor quickly felt empty, and it failed to fulfill one of the MMORPG genre's most basic and seductive features. And that's the feeling like you're living in this breathing online world where your actions affect other players and their actions affect you. That's a hard feeling to obtain when you hardly see anybody. It got so bad that many players felt it was more like a single-player game at times. So there can be issues with geographical space, and on the flip side, there can also be issues with instance player housing. But again, it really depends on how the developer handles it. So next we're going to visit Eorzea in Final Fantasy XIV and take a look at an example of instanced housing that most agree was done quite well, actually. Speaking strictly the housing, they exist in these shared instanced districts with many different plots of land. Kind of think of it like a neighborhood. You'll see other people in your ward and you can visit them and hang out in each other's homes. There are 5 different regions, each with their own aesthetic, as well as small, medium, and large plots of land, which hold different sized houses. And it's a mix of aesthetics and functionality and quality of life. Aesthetically, you can customize its structural components such as its roof, walls, floors, door, fence, as well as, of course, the ability to furnish it with all manner of items. It's a very customizable system that gives a lot of freedom. And as for its functionality, you have some useful things such as the ability to summon your retainers, which are kind of like your followers that can sell stuff on the auction house for you, perform tasks, store items. You can populate it with merchants, a mailbox to check your mail, target dummy to practice your rotation on, or even manage a garden for useful items. And it sounds like a lot, but the key difference here is that you can't do everything in them, and there's still many reasons to go out into the actual world. And additionally, due to the way that it's set up with these shared neighborhoods, they can actually add to the social atmosphere, as curious players can stroll up to your house and say hi, use your facilities, or just see what you did with the place, as well as post on a message board to communicate with you if you are offline. So it's a clever little way to return some social atmosphere from a system that most commonly reduces it. Overall, it's quite well received within the community, and 14 is definitely one of the staples that people reference when they talk about player housing within the genre. Next, we have an interesting case because it's something that I'm admittedly still exploring myself, and that's old school RuneScape. I can't speak too much on this because I'm doing a weird challenge where I'm playing the game blind and I've just gotten into it, but the game has given me a little tutorial preview of what some of the rooms do. This is another example of instanced housing. It's definitely more rigid in its decoration, where you have these predetermined spots where you can build furniture and objects, although you can build a different variety of rooms and manually choose where they go, as well as being able to rotate them to your liking. So it does have some customization, but certainly not as much as a game like Final Fantasy XIV. The real draw seems to be more in its functionality. You have a room where you can build a teleporter for world traversal, another where you make these spell tablets as a convenient way to cast magic, and you can also have servants that can deposit and retrieve items to and from the bank for you, as well as many other buildings. And you might think that, alright, this is kind of verging on maybe too useful and encountering the dreaded garrison problem, but just due to OSR's sandbox nature and how the world is crafted, there are so many reasons to leave your home and to get out into the world of Gielinor that it isn't really a problem from what I can tell. And aside from that, it seems like some of the rooms have this social component to them, such as setting up custom dungeons for your friends to run, or serving them meals in your kitchen, or having your servants greet them, and just allowing them to use your facilities, which is similar to 14 in the sense that while it does take away from the social atmosphere in some cases, it also adds back in unique ways as well. As for New World, it had kind of an interesting hybrid system where you could buy houses in the various towns and multiple players could buy the same plot, and you got something of a score for decorating it, and those who had the highest score would be the ones who were shown to the public, although everyone of course could access their own home. Its customizability was limited to a select few different preset houses to buy within the cities. You couldn't really customize the structural components individually like in 14, as most of the customizability was limited to the standard interior decoration. And beyond aesthetics, it was actually quite useful, as you could put up these trophies that gave you various buffs to your gathering, crafting, and combat, as well as the ability to put down these storage chests in order to store some gear. So these are all mostly instanced examples, and it's what the purists would call casual implementations. I mentioned before that for the homes to be in the actual world, it has to be designed specifically with it in mind. And for this, I can think of no other perfect example than Star Wars Galaxies, which, in my opinion, still to this day, had the most interesting and in-depth player housing system in any MMORPG ever made, ever, in every dimension for all of time. It didn't even just have player housing. It had player cities, complete with a class called the Politician that was based entirely around running it, where if you leveled it, you increased your ability to build and manage it, such as placing new buildings and implementing new features. The planets and the landmass in Galaxies were absolutely massive for a few reasons, but one of them was specifically for player housing. There were 9 at launch, and each one I would say is roughly the size of both the Eastern Kingdoms and Kalimdor combined. And while it had various points of interest, like on Tatooine you had Mos Eisley, Jabba's Palace, Ben Kenobi's home, and a variety of others, it was mostly comprised of these giant vast fields of essentially nothingness. And although it was mostly empty, that didn't mean that it wasn't purposeless, as they were designed to be spaces for people to build cities. A player could put down a house of their choosing, and so could their guildmates, and if enough guildmates put down enough houses close together, it would eventually form this city, and if the guild had a politician to lead them, they could build a variety of useful buildings, such as the shuttle port that they and anyone on the server could use to travel to. You had a medical center to heal and buff people, cantina to watch strippers, a cloning facility as a respawn point if you died nearby. You could make guild halls to hold meetings, host PvP tournaments. Merchants would form these mega malls so they could sell all of their crafted items. You could install mission terminals, which were the game's quests, essentially. And if your politician was high enough, they could even give an increased payout and give a portion of each mission completed to the city's coffers. You could populate the city with profession trainers and so much more to essentially turn it into this huge, bustling hub where you would try to make it as useful as possible in order to attract as many people as possible, in order to make as much money as possible. In most MMOs, the main hubs are the developer-designed cities, such as Orgrimmar and Stormwind for World of Warcraft. However, for Galaxies, in many cases, there were cities that were entirely made by the player base. The whole system was designed largely by Richard Vogel, who had also worked on player housing in the legendary Ultima Online, and in that game, players could actually break into your house and steal your items. And one day a disgruntled player sent Mr. Vogel a letter asking him, "How'd you like your house broken into?" Yep. Hey, I told you the housing community can be hardcore and also insane, but this ended up being a great motivator for him and the SW team as a whole to not die, so they created what is, in my opinion, the best player housing system made in the genre. It had so much depth, and although Galaxies did fail at many things, one of the things it really succeeded in was creating this living, breathing online community, and player cities and housing was a huge part of that. And I really think it's kind of representative of just how powerful a tool it can be if it's wielded correctly, especially if you're able to have it out in the world with no instancing. Tangential nerd moment, but this whole thing was only made possible due to very clever design mechanics. Galaxies by far had the biggest online world at the time, probably still would be today if it were still running. And the reason why they were the only ones to be able to do it was because back then people were still, of course, on 56k modems, so you simply couldn't download 10 planets of the size. Imagine being at 99% and then your mom picks up the phone. Putting them all on CDs was out of the question, as the game would need to ship with like 50 of them, which would of course skyrocket manufacturing costs and make installation its own whole cumbersome project. So what they ended up doing was writing a bunch of text-based procedural rules and passing that onto the server and having the server generate the world around the players as they explored. This put an enormous strain on their servers, but it also made the impossible possible, and allowed them to host these enormous planets, which were able to facilitate a housing and city system as intricate as this in the year of 2003, no less. But anyways, I digress. I kind of have a thing for SWG. The point being is that it can be as simple as you want it to be in something like New World, and it can completely make the game, and the whole game can kind of center around it. And these are just a few examples. It is a very powerful tool that works in both ways. It can have devastating effects on the social atmosphere of the game if done incorrectly, or on the other hand, raise it to entire new levels if it's done well. As for myself, I personally became quite addicted to it when the game Animal Crossing released on the GameCube in 2002, where you enter this crippling debt, and then you're enslaved to pay it off for the rest of your sad, pathetic, miserable life. No interest rates though, and you got to pay it off completely on your own time. Yeah, Tom Nook was a real one, if you think about it. For many others, it was of course The Sims, where you do what you're most afraid of, working and going out into the world and building a life for yourself, all the while building and furnishing your virtual abode. These, along with Ultima Online, would be the critical origins of this subgenre of entertainment, and today it's evolved into its own whole thing. Housing in general is an activity that blends really well with MMORPG, because the whole idea is sort of about living in these virtual worlds with these communities. Psychologically, I think it fosters permanence in a genre that's centered around longevity. It's a creative outlet for people where they can ignore their actual destination of a cardboard box for a moment and play the role of Martha Stewart decorating a large mansion or even a cozy nook hidden away from prying eyes. It can provide simple aesthetics, maybe some quality of life, or even substantial gameplay features, or merely as a social hub to invite friends, host RP events, or flex achievements and collectibles. And the existence of the very large community of people who are quite partial to it shows how important it is to the genre. Let me know your thoughts on this if you think I missed anything, or maybe you can describe your favorite housing system in your favorite MMO. I've tried quite a lot of them in my time playing MMOs, but maybe you think I missed one that would have been good for this video. But yeah, other than that, I hope you enjoyed watching. Like it if you liked it, because I'll see you in the next one. Peace.
Farewell for now, mortals. We hope you enjoyed today's video. See you again soon.